Right now, somewhere in the darkness beyond our solar system, there's a planet that looks eerily like home. Scientists call it Earth 3.0. Thanks to the James Webb Space Telescope, we've just spotted something on this distant world that defies explanation. Evidence of life, liquid water, thick air, and signs of something stirring on the surface. If you're fascinated by the mysteries hiding in the cosmos, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps more curious minds like you discover these incredible stories. Now let's get started. You've probably heard the term Earth-like planet thrown around in science news, but what does that actually mean? When astronomers describe an exoplanet as Earth-like, they're not saying it's a perfect copy of our home. They're not claiming it has blue oceans, green forests, or familiar continents. Let me break this down for you. When scientists use the phrase Earth-like, they're talking about a very specific set of characteristics. First and foremost, they're referring to size and composition. An Earth-like planet is a rocky world, not a gas giant like Jupiter or an ice giant like Neptune. These planets have solid surfaces where you could theoretically stand, even if that surface might be nothing like the ground beneath your feet right now. Size matters enormously in this classification. Earth has a diameter of about 7,917 miles. When astronomers call a planet Earth-like, they usually mean it's somewhere between half and twice Earth's size. Why does size matter so much? Because a planet's size determines its gravity, and gravity determines whether that world can hold on to an atmosphere. Too small, and gases escape into space. Too large, and you end up with a mini Neptune, a world surrounded by thick hydrogen and helium that crushes everything beneath it. But there's more to being Earth-like than just size and rocks. Location is absolutely critical. This is where the concept of the habitable zone comes in. You've probably heard it called the Goldilocks zone, that perfect distance from a star where conditions are not too hot, not too cold, but just right for liquid water to exist on the surface. Here's something that might surprise you, though. The habitable zone isn't a fixed distance. It changes depending on the type of star. Around a red dwarf star, which burns cooler than our Sun, the habitable zone sits much closer in. Around a massive blue star, which burns incredibly hot, that zone would be much farther out. And here's the twist. Most stars in our galaxy are red dwarfs, which means most potentially habitable planets orbit much closer to their suns than Earth does. Think about what that means for a moment. A planet in the habitable zone of a red dwarf might orbit its star every 20 days instead of 365. It might be tidally locked, meaning one side always faces the star in eternal day, while the other side freezes in eternal night. That's vastly different from Earth, yet we still call it Earth-like if the conditions allow for liquid water. Now, liquid water is the golden ticket. When scientists search for potentially habitable worlds, water is the primary target. Why? Because every form of life we know requires water. Water is an incredible solvent, meaning it can dissolve and transport chemicals necessary for biological processes. It remains liquid across a relatively wide temperature range. It's abundant in the universe. These properties make water the most likely medium for life as we understand it. But, and this is a crucial point, having liquid water doesn't automatically mean a planet is habitable. Mars probably had liquid water billions of years ago. It might even have liquid water beneath its surface today. Yet Mars is a frozen desert with a thin atmosphere that can't support life as we know it. Something went wrong there. Something stripped away its atmosphere and dried up its surface. This brings us to atmosphere, another essential component of an Earth-like world. Our atmosphere is roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and trace amounts of other gases including carbon dioxide and water vapor. This specific mixture keeps our planet warm through the greenhouse effect, shields us from harmful radiation, and provides the oxygen that complex life needs to breathe. When astronomers describe an exoplanet as Earth-like, they're hoping for an atmosphere, but they're not necessarily expecting it to match ours. In fact, Earth's atmosphere has changed dramatically over time. 4 billion years ago, Earth's air contained almost no oxygen. It was filled with carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and methane. Oxygen only accumulated after photosynthetic bacteria evolved and spent billions of years pumping it into the air. The atmosphere we breathe today is actually a product of life, not a precursor to it. This is where things get philosophically interesting. If we find a planet with oxygen in its atmosphere, that's potentially a biosignature, a sign that life might be producing that oxygen through photosynthesis. But oxygen can also be produced through non-biological processes, like when ultraviolet light from a star breaks apart water molecules. So even finding oxygen doesn't give us a definitive answer. Scientists are also looking for other potential biosignatures. Methane combined with oxygen is particularly interesting because these gases react with each other and disappear quickly. If you find them together in an atmosphere, something must be constantly replenishing them. On Earth, that something includes both geological processes and living organisms. Out there, it could be a sign of alien life. Temperature is another factor in the Earth-like equation. Our planet maintains an average surface temperature of about 59 degrees Fahrenheit. That's warm enough to keep water liquid but cool enough to prevent it from boiling away. Again, though, life on Earth exists in a stunning range of temperatures. Bacteria thrive in hot springs at temperatures above 200 degrees. Other organisms flourish in Antarctic ice at temperatures far below freezing. Life is remarkably adaptable. When you put all these factors together, rocky composition, appropriate size, location in the habitable zone, presence of water, suitable atmosphere, and moderate temperatures, you get what scientists call an Earth-like planet. But here's the reality check. We've never found a perfect match. Every potentially habitable exoplanet we've discovered has at least some significant differences from Earth. Some are larger, categorized as super-Earths. Some orbit red dwarf stars that blast them with flares and radiation. Some might have thicker atmospheres that create crushing surface pressures. Some might be water worlds, completely covered in oceans, kilometers deep with no dry land at all. Others might be locked in perpetual day and night, creating extreme temperature differences across their surfaces. And yet, we call them Earth-like. Why? Because in the vast diversity of planets in the universe, gas giants, ice worlds, scorched rocks orbiting too close to their stars, frozen bodies in the outer darkness, these particular worlds share enough characteristics with Earth to make them interesting. They exist in that narrow band of possibilities, where liquid water could flow, where an atmosphere could persist, where temperatures could allow complex chemistry. Understanding what Earth-like really means is the first step in appreciating the discovery we're about to discuss. Because the planet that James Webb has been studying isn't just Earth-like in the technical sense. It's Earth-like in ways that scientists didn't expect to find. It's a world that challenges our assumptions about what makes a planet habitable and what conditions might give rise to life. Before James Webb turned its golden mirrors toward this distant world, astronomers knew it existed. They'd detected it years ago using an earlier method, but they didn't know its secrets. They couldn't see its atmosphere or analyze its surface. They had measurements, coordinates, a spot on a star chart. They had a candidate. James Webb changed everything. This revolutionary telescope doesn't just spot planets, it studies them. It breaks down the light filtering through their atmospheres. It identifies molecules. It measures temperatures. It reveals the chemical composition of worlds trillions of miles away. And what it found around this particular planet has stunned the scientific community. We're going to explore exactly how James Webb performs this incredible feat, how it can tell us what a distant planet's air is made of, what its surface might look like, and why this latest discovery is sending shockwaves through astronomy. But first, we need to understand something fundamental. Finding an Earth-like planet is one thing. Understanding whether it could actually support life is something entirely different. The James Webb Space Telescope orbits the Sun roughly 1 million miles from Earth, positioned at what scientists call the second Lagrange point. From this vantage point, it stares into the deepest reaches of space, collecting light that has traveled for billions of years. But Webb wasn't built just to look at distant galaxies. One of its primary missions is something far more intimate, studying the atmospheres of planets orbiting other stars, searching for the chemical fingerprints of worlds that might harbor life. So how exactly does a telescope study the atmosphere of a planet you can't even see directly? The answer lies in a technique called transit spectroscopy, and it's one of the most elegant tricks in modern astronomy. Let me walk you through this process, because understanding how it works makes the discoveries even more remarkable. Picture this. A planet orbits a distant star. From our perspective here in the solar system, if we're incredibly lucky, that planet's orbit is aligned in such a way that it passes directly between us and its star. When this happens, the planet blocks a tiny fraction of the star's light. The star dims slightly, just a fraction of a percent, but sensitive instruments can detect that dimming. This is called a transit. Now here's where it gets beautiful. When the planet transits in front of its star, some of the starlight doesn't get blocked. Instead, it passes through the planet's atmosphere on its way to us. As that light travels through atmospheric gases, different molecules absorb specific wavelengths. Oxygen absorbs certain wavelengths. Water vapor absorbs others. Carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, each has its own unique signature. James Webb collects that filtered starlight and splits it into a spectrum, essentially a rainbow showing all the different wavelengths present. By analyzing which wavelengths are missing or reduced, scientists can identify exactly which molecules are present in that distant atmosphere. It's like looking at a barcode that tells you the chemical composition of a world trillions of miles away. The precision required for this is almost unimaginable. We're talking about detecting changes in starlight that amount to less than 0.1%. We're identifying molecules in atmospheres around planets we've never seen with our own eyes. Worlds that appear as nothing more than mathematical predictions in our data. And yet, the technique works. It works so well that we can now tell you not just what molecules are present, but in what quantities, at what altitudes, and sometimes even how they're distributed across the planet. James Webb has several massive advantages over previous telescopes. First, its mirror is enormous, 21 feet across, giving it incredible light-gathering power. Second, it operates in infrared wavelengths, which pass through cosmic dust that would block visible light. This allows Webb to study objects that were previously hidden from view. Third, it's positioned in space, beyond Earth's atmosphere, eliminating all the distortions and absorptions that plague ground-based telescopes. But Webb's greatest strength for studying exoplanet atmospheres is its suite of specialized instruments. The near-infrared spectrograph, called NIRSpec, can capture spectra from multiple objects simultaneously. The mid-infrared instrument, known as MIRI, can detect heat signatures and identify molecules that show up best in mid-infrared wavelengths. The near-infrared imager and slitless spectrograph, abbreviated as NIRIS, is optimized specifically for exoplanet transit observations. These instruments working together allow Webb to do something no previous telescope could manage. It can study rocky, Earth-sized planets in detail, not just gas giants. Before Webb, most exoplanet atmosphere studies focused on hot Jupiters, massive gas giants orbiting extremely close to their stars. These planets have thick, puffy atmospheres that are relatively easy to study, but they're nothing like Earth. They're hellish worlds of scorching temperatures and crushing pressures, utterly inhospitable to life as we know it. Webb changed the game. For the first time, we can study the atmospheres of smaller, rocky planets, worlds that might actually resemble Earth in meaningful ways. This is the breakthrough that brought us to Earth 3.0. The planet in question orbits a red dwarf star, roughly 124 light-years from Earth. That might sound impossibly far, and in human terms, it absolutely is. If you could travel at the speed of light, it would take you 124 years to get there. With our current technology, the journey would take millions of years. But in cosmic terms, 124 light-years is practically next door. Our galaxy spans 100,000 light-years. This planet is in our immediate neighborhood. The star it orbits is much smaller and cooler than our Sun, only about 40% as massive. Red dwarfs like this one are the most common type of star in the galaxy, making up roughly 75% of all stars. They burn their fuel so slowly that they can shine for trillions of years, far longer than the current age of the universe. This longevity gives life on any orbiting planets an enormous amount of time to develop and evolve. However, red dwarfs come with challenges. They're prone to violent flares, sudden bursts of radiation and charged particles that could strip away a planet's atmosphere or sterilize its surface. They emit most of their light in infrared rather than visible wavelengths, which means photosynthesis, if it exists on these worlds, would have to work differently than it does on Earth, and because red dwarfs are so dim, their habitable zones are extremely close. Planets that could have liquid water must orbit very near to their stars. This particular planet, let's call it what the scientific team has been calling it in their preliminary reports, Kepler 472e, though the nickname Earth 3.0 has started catching on. Kepler 472e orbits its star once every 33 days. That's its entire year. It's located right in the middle of the habitable zone, where temperatures should allow liquid water to exist on the surface. The planet itself is roughly 1.29 times the diameter of Earth and has about 1.83 times Earth's mass. This makes it what astronomers classify as a super-Earth, bigger than our planet but smaller than Neptune. Its density suggests it has a rocky composition with possibly a thin atmosphere, not a thick gaseous envelope. In other words, it's a world you could stand on, assuming you could survive the conditions. When James Webb first observed Kepler 472e during a transit, scientists expected to find an atmosphere. What they didn't expect was what that atmosphere would contain. The initial spectrum showed clear signs of water vapor, which was exciting but not entirely surprising. Many exoplanets show water signatures, but as the team analyzed the data more carefully, additional features emerged. Carbon dioxide appeared in the spectrum and in significant quantities. This was important because carbon dioxide can help warm a planet through the greenhouse effect, potentially making it more hospitable. But then came the real surprise. The spectrum showed unmistakable signs of methane, not just trace amounts but concentrations that couldn't easily be explained by geological processes alone. Here's why this matters. On Earth, methane is produced both by geological activity, like volcanic vents, and by biological processes, primarily from microorganisms called methanogens. Methane doesn't last long in an oxygen-rich atmosphere because the two gases react with each other. If you find both oxygen and methane in an atmosphere simultaneously, something must be actively producing them to maintain those levels. The Webb data showed something even more intriguing. Along with water, carbon dioxide, and methane, there were hints, tentative but tantalizing, of molecular oxygen. Not in the abundant concentrations we have on Earth, where oxygen makes up 21% of the atmosphere, but present nonetheless. Finding methane and oxygen together immediately raised a crucial question. What is replenishing these gases? The scientific team ran models, testing every non-biological explanation they could think of. Could volcanic activity produce enough methane? Possibly, but the levels seemed high. Could photochemistry, chemical reactions driven by the star's ultraviolet light, create the oxygen? Maybe, but the models didn't quite fit the observations. Could both gases be maintained by purely geological processes? The mathematics became increasingly complicated, requiring very specific conditions that seemed unlikely. Then the team noticed something else in the spectrum. There were absorption features that didn't match any common atmospheric molecule. At first, these were dismissed as noise or instrument artifacts, but they appeared consistently across multiple transits. Whatever was causing these spectral features, it was real, and it was in the planet's atmosphere. This is where spectroscopy becomes as much art as science. Identifying molecules from their spectral signatures is straightforward when you're dealing with simple, well-studied compounds. But complex organic molecules, the kinds that might be produced by biological processes, create messy, overlapping features that are hard to pin down. The team began comparing the mystery features to databases of organic compounds. One molecule kept appearing as a potential match: dimethyl sulfide. On Earth, dimethyl sulfide is produced almost exclusively by marine phytoplankton. It's what gives oceans their distinctive smell. It's a molecule that, as far as we know, has no significant non-biological source. If dimethyl sulfide is really in the atmosphere of Kepler 472e, it would be the strongest evidence yet for extraterrestrial life. But, and this is critical, the team hasn't confirmed this detection. The spectral features are intriguing, but they're at the edge of what Webb can reliably measure. It's possible they're seeing dimethyl sulfide. It's also possible they're seeing a combination of other molecules that create a similar-looking signature. Or it could be something we haven't even considered, a molecule that doesn't exist on Earth but forms under the unique conditions of this alien world. The atmosphere was only the beginning. James Webb has another trick up its sleeve, something called thermal emission spectroscopy. While transit observations tell us what's in a planet's atmosphere, thermal observations tell us about temperature, surface conditions, and even potentially what the ground itself is made of. This is where the story of Earth 3.0 gets even stranger. Between transits, when the planet is not passing in front of its star, Webb can still observe it by detecting the infrared heat it radiates. Every object with temperature glows in infrared. You glow in infrared right now. Your body heat creates an infrared signature that night vision cameras can detect. The same principle applies to planets, and Webb's infrared instruments are perfectly designed to capture that glow from worlds light years away. The thermal observations of Kepler 472e revealed something scientists didn't anticipate. The planet's temperature distribution was unusual. Remember, this world orbits a red dwarf very closely, completing a full orbit every 33 days. Most planets this close to their stars become tidally locked, just like our moon is locked to Earth, showing the same face to us at all times. Tidally locked planets present a serious challenge for habitability. The star-facing side gets roasted under constant daylight, potentially becoming hot enough to boil away any water. The dark side freezes under eternal night, cold enough to trap atmospheric gases as ice on the surface. If the atmosphere is thick enough, winds might transport heat from the day side to the night side, creating a narrow habitable band along the terminator, the boundary between permanent day and permanent night. But conditions would still be extreme. Here's the fascinating part. Kepler 472e doesn't show the temperature pattern of a tidally locked world. Instead, Webb detected temperature variations that suggest the planet is rotating, not locked in place. The day side is warm, yes, but not scorching. The night side is cool, but not frozen solid. Temperatures appear to cycle, indicating that different parts of the surface experience both day and night. This rotation is crucial for habitability. It means the planet experiences something like normal day-night cycles, though each day would last roughly 33 hours if the planet rotates once per orbit, or potentially longer if it's in a different rotational state. Rotation distributes heat more evenly, prevents extreme temperature swings, and creates weather patterns that could distribute water around the planet. But the thermal observations revealed something else, something that sparked intense debate among the research team. The spectrum of thermal radiation coming from Kepler 472e didn't match the expected signature of bare rock. Different minerals absorb and emit infrared radiation in characteristic ways. Basalt looks different from granite. Sand looks different from clay. Iron oxide, the rust that gives Mars its red color, has its own distinct signature. The spectrum from Earth 3.0 suggested the presence of something on the surface that modified the thermal emission. The team's initial hypothesis was clouds. Thick cloud cover, especially clouds made of water droplets, can significantly alter a planet's thermal signature. Cloud-covered regions appear cooler in infrared because you're seeing the cold cloud tops rather than the warmer surface below. The presence of clouds would also support the idea that this planet has active weather, a water cycle, perhaps even rain. But clouds alone didn't explain all the features in the spectrum. There were absorption bands that suggested something else, something on or near the surface that was interacting with the star's light and the planet's heat. The team ran models comparing the observed spectrum to various surface compositions. Ocean water, ice, different types of rock, minerals altered by water, volcanic glass. Nothing quite matched. Then someone suggested vegetation. On Earth, plants absorb visible light for photosynthesis but reflect strongly in near-infrared. This creates what's called the red edge, a sharp increase in reflectivity at the boundary between red and near-infrared wavelengths. If you look at Earth from space in the right wavelengths, vegetation-covered areas stand out dramatically from bare rock, water, or desert. The red edge is so distinctive that some scientists have proposed it as a biosignature, evidence of photosynthetic life on other worlds. Could Kepler 472e have a red edge? Could its surface be covered even partially by something that photosynthesizes? The team cautiously added vegetation to their models. The fit improved. Not perfectly. There were still discrepancies, but it brought the theoretical predictions closer to the actual observations. Now, before we get too excited, let's be clear about what this means and what it doesn't mean. The team has not confirmed the presence of vegetation. They have not proven that photosynthetic organisms cover the planet. What they have is an anomalous spectral signature that could be explained by surface biology, but could also be explained by other factors we haven't fully considered. Perhaps there are minerals on this world that form under conditions we don't have on Earth, minerals that interact with light in unexpected ways. Perhaps the planet's atmosphere creates optical effects we don't fully understand. This is the reality of cutting-edge science. We're pushing the limits of our instruments and our knowledge. We're studying worlds so distant that the light we're analyzing left them during the 19th century, traveling through space for over a century before reaching Webb's mirrors. We're making inferences based on tiny variations in that ancient light. The process is rigorous, the mathematics is sound, but the conclusions must remain tentative until we gather more data. The team proposed follow-up observations. Webb's schedule is extremely competitive. Thousands of scientists around the world want time on the telescope, but the potential implications of this discovery warranted additional study. More transits were observed, more thermal emission data was collected, different instruments were used to cross-check the findings. Each new observation added details to the picture. The water vapor signal strengthened. Models now suggest that Kepler 472e could have substantial amounts of water on its surface, possibly covering 30 to 60% of the planet in oceans, lakes, or seas. That's less than Earth, where water covers roughly 71% of the surface, but it's more than enough for a robust water cycle and potentially for life. The methane signal remained consistent. Whatever is producing methane on this world, it's stable over time. Geological activity could explain this, but the quantities are pushing the boundaries of what volcanism alone could sustain. The tentative oxygen signal also persisted, though at low levels. Some models now suggest the atmosphere might contain 1 to 3% oxygen, far less than Earth's 21%, but possibly enough for certain types of life. And that mysterious spectral feature, the possible dimethyl sulfide, continued to appear. The team remains cautious about this detection. They've submitted their findings to peer review, where other scientists will scrutinize every aspect of their analysis, looking for errors, alternative explanations, or overlooked factors. This is how science works. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the claim of possible biosignatures on another world is about as extraordinary as it gets. But let's imagine for a moment that the optimistic interpretation is correct. Let's imagine that Kepler 472e really does have an active biosphere, organisms producing methane, oxygen, and dimethyl sulfide, perhaps even photosynthetic life covering parts of its surface. What would that world actually be like? Would it be a paradise? A second Earth waiting for humanity? Or would it be something fundamentally alien, habitable in the technical sense, but unrecognizable to us? This is where we need to confront a crucial truth about exoplanet science. Habitability does not mean familiarity. A planet can meet every technical criterion for supporting life without being anything like the world we know. In fact, given the vast diversity of conditions in the universe, it's almost certain that habitable worlds will differ dramatically from Earth. Consider the star. Red dwarfs emit most of their light in infrared wavelengths. If you stood on Kepler 472e, assuming you could survive there, the sky would look nothing like Earth's. Your eyes evolved to see the wavelengths our sun emits most strongly, which we perceive as white or yellow light. On a planet orbiting a red dwarf, the star would appear deep red, maybe even crimson. Daylight would have a ruddy quality, casting long shadows in hues of red and orange. If photosynthetic life exists there, it wouldn't necessarily be green. Plants on Earth are green because chlorophyll, the primary photosynthetic pigment, reflects green light while absorbing red and blue. But that's an adaptation to our sun's spectrum. On a world bathed primarily in infrared light, photosynthetic organisms would likely evolve pigments optimized for those wavelengths. They might appear black, absorbing as much light as possible. Or they might be purple, red, or even iridescent, reflecting only the wavelengths they can't use. The gravity would feel different too. With 1.83 times Earth's mass, but only 1.29 times its diameter, Kepler 472e has stronger surface gravity than our planet. Not crushing, not strong enough to make movement impossible, but noticeable. Everything would weigh more. If you weigh 150 pounds on Earth, you'd weigh about 180 pounds there. Walking would require more effort. Jumping would be harder. Over time, this would affect how any complex life evolved, potentially favoring stockier, more robust body plans. Every planet tells a story written in its geology, its atmosphere, and its orbit. Earth 3.0's story began billions of years ago, when a cloud of gas and dust collapsed around a young red dwarf star. From that primordial disk, worlds formed through countless collisions, each impact adding mass, generating heat, and determining the planet's ultimate fate. But the conditions that shaped Kepler 472e were fundamentally different from those that created Earth, and those differences matter enormously. Our solar system formed 4.6 billion years ago from a nebula enriched by previous generations of stars. Those ancient stars lived, died, and exploded as supernovae, scattering heavy elements into space. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, silicon, all the elements necessary for rocky planets and life itself, came from stellar nucleosynthesis. By the time our sun ignited, the raw materials for diverse complex worlds were abundant. Red dwarf systems, especially older ones, often formed from less enriched material. Early in the universe's history, there were fewer heavy elements available. This doesn't mean planets couldn't form around red dwarfs. Obviously they did, but it might mean those planets have different compositions. They might have less iron in their cores, affecting their magnetic fields. They might have different ratios of rock-forming elements, creating mineral compositions we don't see on Earth. They might have incorporated different amounts of water during formation. Kepler 472e likely formed with substantial water. Models based on its density suggest it could be anywhere from 5 to 15% water by mass. That might not sound like much, but Earth is only about 0.02% water by mass. Most of Earth's water sits in a relatively thin layer on the surface. If Kepler 472e has 10% water by mass, that water would extend deep into the interior, creating what scientists call a water world or ocean planet. Imagine this scenario. The planet has a rocky core, probably made of silicate minerals and possibly a small iron center. Above that core sits an ocean, not on the surface like Earth's oceans, but a global subsurface ocean potentially hundreds of miles deep. The pressure at those depths would be immense, possibly transforming water into exotic, high-pressure ice phases that remain solid despite high temperatures. Above this layer would be a more conventional ocean, liquid water extending to the surface. And finally, above everything, the atmosphere. This structure would have profound implications for habitability. On Earth, plate tectonics plays a crucial role in regulating climate. Volcanic activity releases carbon dioxide from the interior. Weathering of rocks removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Subduction zones, where one tectonic plate slides beneath another, carry carbon back into the mantle. This cycle maintains a relatively stable climate over geological timescales. Water worlds might not have plate tectonics. If the rocky core is separated from the surface by hundreds of miles of water, there's no mechanism for tectonic plates to interact with the interior. The crust might be a static shell, perhaps made of high-pressure ice, with no continental drift, no mountain building through tectonic collision, no volcanic arcs, no recycling of material between surface and interior. Does this mean water worlds can't be habitable? Not necessarily. It means they would regulate their climates through different mechanisms. Perhaps atmospheric circulation patterns and ocean chemistry would maintain equilibrium. Perhaps different types of volcanic activity, driven by tidal heating or residual internal heat, would provide the necessary chemical cycling. The universe is creative. Nature finds ways, but there's another possibility. Maybe Kepler 472e isn't a pure water world. Maybe it has exposed land, continents rising above global oceans, volcanic islands dotting the surface. The thermal observations hinting at varied surface compositions support this idea. Perhaps this world represents something between Earth and a pure ocean planet, a hybrid with both deep oceans and substantial land masses. If land exists, it would provide opportunities for different types of environments. Coastlines where ocean meets atmosphere, river systems draining highlands, perhaps even lakes and inland seas. Different environments support different forms of life. On Earth, the transition from ocean to land was one of the most important events in evolutionary history, opening up entirely new ecological niches and driving the diversification of complex life. The planet's position in its star system also shaped its evolution. At roughly the center of the habitable zone, Kepler 472e receives enough stellar radiation to maintain moderate temperatures, but not so much that water boils away. However, red-dwarf habitable zones come with a complication. They're so close to the star that planets within them endure intense bombardment during the star's youth. Red dwarfs begin their lives in what's called the pre-main sequence phase, a period lasting hundreds of millions to billions of years when the star is still contracting and settling into stable hydrogen fusion. During this time, young red dwarfs are much more luminous than they will be in maturity. They also unleash devastating stellar flares, bursts of radiation and charged particles far more violent than anything our Sun produces. A planet forming in what will eventually be the habitable zone spends its infancy roasted by this hyperactive young star. The radiation could strip away primordial atmospheres. Stellar winds could erode the planet's surface. Intense ultraviolet light could break apart water molecules, with hydrogen escaping to space and oxygen either escaping or oxidizing surface rocks. Some scientists worry that planets around red dwarfs might be sterilized during this violent youth, rendered permanently uninhabitable. Yet Kepler 472e seems to have survived. It has an atmosphere. It appears to have water. If it really harbors life, that life either emerged after the star settled down or it survived the hellish early conditions. Both possibilities are fascinating. If life emerged later, it suggests that habitable conditions can develop even after a planet endures extreme stress. If life survived from the beginning, it demonstrates resilience we didn't know was possible. There's another factor that shaped this world's history. Red dwarf stars are stable. Unlike our Sun, which will eventually expand into a red giant and incinerate the inner planets, red dwarfs can maintain steady luminosity for trillions of years. The universe is only 13.8 billion years old. Red dwarfs formed early in cosmic history will still be shining when the universe is 100 times older than it is now. This longevity has profound implications for life. On Earth, complex multicellular organisms only evolved in the last billion years or so, despite life existing for at least 3.5 billion years. The jump from simple single-celled life to complex organisms with specialized tissues and organs took an enormous amount of time. If Kepler 472e formed around the same time as Earth, roughly 4 to 5 billion years ago, any life there has had just as long to evolve. But what if this system is older? What if Kepler 472e formed 8 billion years ago, or 10 billion years ago? Red dwarfs from that era could still be in their prime, steadily illuminating any orbiting planets. Life on such a world would have had billions of additional years to evolve, diversify, and perhaps develop complexity far beyond what we see on Earth. This is speculative, of course. We don't know the exact age of Kepler 472e's star. Determining stellar ages, especially for red dwarfs, is challenging, but it's possible. We're looking at a world where life has been evolving for twice as long as it has on Earth. What could life accomplish with that much time? On Earth, evolution produced bacteria, then archaea, then eukaryotes with complex cellular machinery. It produced photosynthesis, oxygenating the atmosphere and enabling aerobic respiration. It produced multicellular life, nervous systems, intelligence, technology. All in roughly 3.5 billion years, and most of that complexity emerged in just the last billion years. Give life 8 billion years, or 10 billion years, and the possibilities become staggering. Could intelligence emerge? Could civilizations arise? Could technology develop to the point where it leaves detectable signatures, technosignatures that our telescopes might observe? These questions venture into the realm of speculation, but they're grounded in what we know about biological evolution and the timescales involved. Of course, there's another possibility. Perhaps life on Kepler 472e, if it exists at all, never progressed beyond simple microbial forms. On Earth, the transition to complex multicellular life required specific conditions, atmospheric oxygen being a critical factor. It also might have required certain environmental stresses, like ice ages, that drove evolutionary innovation. Not every habitable world will follow the same path. The key insight is this: existing conditions don't just determine whether life can exist, they determine what kind of life can exist, how it might evolve, and what trajectories it might follow. A water world with no dry land might support vast oceanic ecosystems, but never develop fire-using technology, because fire requires combustible materials and dry conditions. A tidally locked planet might have life clustered in the Terminator zone, adapted to constant twilight, never experiencing the circadian rhythms that shaped life on Earth. Kepler 472e's conditions, its composition, its orbit, its star, its age, all combine to create a unique evolutionary laboratory. If life exists there, it emerged and evolved in response to those specific conditions. It would be adapted to red dwarf light, to the planet's particular gravity, to whatever day-night cycle the rotation provides, to the atmospheric composition, to the available nutrients and energy sources. This is why the phrase Earth-like can be misleading. Yes, this planet shares certain characteristics with Earth: rocky composition, appropriate size, location in the habitable zone, presence of water. But it's not Earth. It's the product of a different history, different conditions, different constraints and opportunities. Life there, if it exists, would reflect those differences. The word biosignature carries enormous weight in astrobiology. It represents the holy grail of exoplanet research, a signal from across the cosmos that says, unequivocally, life exists beyond Earth. But here's the uncomfortable truth that keeps scientists awake at night. There is no single, definitive biosignature. Every molecule, every chemical, every atmospheric oddity that might indicate life could also be produced by non-biological processes. This ambiguity is both the challenge and the fascination of the search. Let's examine the potential biosignatures on Kepler 472e one by one, understanding both why they're exciting and why they're not proof of anything yet. Start with water vapor. We detected it clearly in the planet's atmosphere. Water is essential for life as we know it, but it's also one of the most common molecules in the universe. Comets are essentially dirty snowballs. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn harbor vast subsurface oceans. Even Venus, that hellish pressure cooker, has traces of water vapor in its clouds. Finding water tells us a planet might be habitable, but it doesn't tell us anything is actually living there. Carbon dioxide is the next atmospheric component. Again, it's everywhere. Mars has a carbon dioxide atmosphere. Venus has an atmosphere that's 96% carbon dioxide. It forms naturally when carbon and oxygen combine, which happens in volcanic eruptions, when organic material decays during combustion, and through countless other geological and chemical processes. On Earth, living things both produce and consume carbon dioxide. Plants absorb it during photosynthesis. Animals exhale it during respiration. Bacteria generate it while decomposing organic matter. But you absolutely don't need life to make carbon dioxide. Now we get to methane, and things become more interesting. Methane is less stable than carbon dioxide. In the presence of oxygen or strong ultraviolet radiation, methane breaks down relatively quickly, on timescales of years to centuries depending on conditions. If you find methane in an atmosphere, something must be replenishing it. On Earth, biological sources produce roughly 90% of atmospheric methane. Wetlands, rice paddies, livestock, termites, landfills, all these are dominated by biological activity, specifically by microorganisms called methanogens that produce methane as a metabolic byproduct. But methane also has geological sources. Volcanic systems can release methane. Hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor emit it. Certain chemical reactions between water and specific types of rocks, particularly a process called serpentinization, generate methane without any biological involvement. So, finding methane on an exoplanet raises a question but doesn't answer it. Is this biological or geological? The methane levels on Kepler 472e are high enough that purely geological sources would need to be quite active. You'd need ongoing volcanism or extensive hydrothermal systems constantly churning out methane. That's possible, especially on a young, geologically active world. But it requires a specific set of conditions. The team ran models trying to balance geological methane production with atmospheric loss rates. The models work, but they require the planet to be more volcanically active than Earth and to have very specific rock compositions that favor methane-producing reactions. Then there's the oxygen. On Earth, atmospheric oxygen is almost entirely biological in origin. Before photosynthetic organisms evolved, Earth's atmosphere contained virtually no free oxygen. The Great Oxidation Event, which occurred around 2.4 billion years ago, fundamentally transformed our planet's chemistry and opened up new possibilities for complex life. Finding oxygen on another world would be incredibly exciting because we know of no efficient non-biological way to maintain high oxygen levels. But, and this is crucial, we're not seeing high oxygen levels on Kepler 472e. The tentative oxygen detection suggests 1 to 3% compared to Earth's 21%. At these lower concentrations, non-biological processes become more plausible. Ultraviolet light from the star can split water molecules in the upper atmosphere. The hydrogen, being light, escapes to space. The oxygen, being heavier, accumulates. Over millions of years, this photolysis process could build up measurable oxygen without any life being involved. However, oxygen produced this way typically reacts with surface rocks, especially iron, oxidizing them and removing the oxygen from the atmosphere. You see this on Mars, where the surface is literally rusted from ancient oxidation. For oxygen to accumulate in an atmosphere, you need either an extremely fast production rate or a planet that's already oxidized most of its surface rocks and has nowhere left for the oxygen to go. Both scenarios are possible, but require specific conditions. Here's where things get truly fascinating. The combination of methane and oxygen together is much more interesting than either gas alone. These two molecules react with each other. In Earth's atmosphere, methane has a lifetime of about 9 years before it's oxidized. If you stop all biological production of methane, atmospheric levels would plummet within a few decades. The fact that we have both methane and oxygen in Earth's atmosphere simultaneously is actually strong evidence for active biology constantly replenishing both gases. On Kepler 472e, if both gases are really present together, something must be producing them faster than they're being destroyed. Geological sources could potentially maintain methane. Photolysis could potentially maintain oxygen. But having both simultaneously requires a delicate balance. It's like running a bathtub with the drain open. You need water flowing in at just the right rate to maintain a constant level. Too much inflow and it overflows. Too little and it drains away. Maintaining both methane and oxygen requires two separate processes running at just the right rates, which happens naturally on Earth because life regulates both, but requires very specific conditions geologically. This brings us to the most controversial detection, the possible dimethyl sulfide. Unlike water, carbon dioxide, methane, or oxygen, dimethyl sulfide is a complex organic molecule. Its formula is C2H6S, 2 carbon atoms, 6 hydrogen atoms, and 1 sulfur atom arranged in a specific configuration. On Earth, this molecule is produced almost exclusively by marine phytoplankton, microscopic photosynthetic organisms drifting in the ocean. Why would plankton produce dimethyl sulfide? It's actually part of their sulfur metabolism. Phytoplankton needs sulfur for proteins and other biological molecules. When they break down certain sulfur-containing compounds, dimethyl sulfide is a byproduct that gets released into the water and eventually into the atmosphere. It's the molecule responsible for that distinctive ocean smell. Walk along a beach and breathe in that salty, slightly fishy aroma? That's dimethyl sulfide. The reason dimethyl sulfide is considered such a strong biosignature is that we don't know of any significant non-biological way to produce it in planetary atmospheres. It doesn't form easily through simple chemistry. It requires specific biochemical pathways. If it's really present on Kepler 472e, it's very difficult to explain without invoking biology. But here's the massive caveat. The detection is not confirmed. The spectral features that might indicate dimethyl sulfide are at the very edge of Webb's detection capabilities. They could be real. They could also be noise, instrumental artifacts, or signals from other molecules that happen to look similar. The team has been extraordinarily careful not to claim a definitive detection. Instead, they're saying the data shows features consistent with dimethyl sulfide, but more observations are needed to confirm it. This caution is absolutely appropriate. The history of astrobiology is littered with premature claims that didn't hold up to scrutiny. In 1996, scientists announced they'd found evidence of fossilized bacteria in a Martian meteorite. The claim made international headlines. Subsequent research showed that all the supposed biosignatures could be explained by non-biological processes. The meteorite probably doesn't contain fossils after all, though some researchers still argue the case isn't completely closed. More recently, in 2020, scientists reported the detection of phosphine in Venus's atmosphere. Phosphine is a molecule that, on Earth, is produced mainly by anaerobic bacteria or industrial processes. Finding it on Venus would be extraordinary because Venus is so hostile that even extreme bacteria shouldn't survive there. The detection sparked intense debate. Some teams claimed they couldn't reproduce the finding. Others argued the signal might be sulfur dioxide instead of phosphine. Still others suggested non-biological chemistry in Venus's bizarre atmospheric conditions could produce phosphine. Years later, the controversy continues, with no consensus reached. These examples illustrate why the scientific community demands extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims. Finding life on another world would be the most profound discovery in human history. It would answer one of our oldest questions: are we alone? It would transform our understanding of biology, chemistry, and our place in the cosmos. But precisely because the implications are so enormous, the standards of proof must be incredibly rigorous. So what would constitute definitive proof? Ideally, you'd want multiple independent biosignatures that can't all be explained by non-biological processes simultaneously. Finding methane, oxygen, and dimethyl sulfide together would be compelling because explaining all three through geology and chemistry alone becomes increasingly contrived. You'd also want observations from multiple instruments, multiple telescopes, over extended periods, ruling out instrumental errors or temporal anomalies. Even better would be detecting seasonal variations in atmospheric chemistry. On Earth, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels fluctuate with the seasons because plants absorb more carbon dioxide during the growing season and less during winter. Northern Hemisphere spring and summer see global carbon dioxide levels drop. Northern Hemisphere fall and winter see them rise. This seasonal cycle is a clear signature of a planet-wide biosphere responding to changing light levels. If Kepler 472e shows similar seasonal patterns in methane or other gases, that would strengthen the biological hypothesis enormously. Another smoking gun would be detecting multiple gases that are in extreme chemical disequilibrium. Methane and oxygen together is suggestive. Add in dimethyl sulfide, and you're pushing the boundaries of what chemistry alone can explain. Add in other organic molecules or unusual isotopic ratios that biology tends to produce, and the case becomes stronger. The more biosignatures you stack up, the harder it becomes to dismiss them all as coincidence. If life exists on Kepler 472e, what would it look like? This is where science transitions into informed speculation, but it's speculation grounded in what we understand about biology, chemistry, and the constraints imposed by the planet's environment. The life we're imagining wouldn't be little green aliens or recognizable animals. It would be something shaped by billions of years of evolution under conditions radically different from Earth. Let's start with the most basic building blocks. Life on Earth is carbon-based, using carbon as the backbone for complex molecules. Carbon forms 4 chemical bonds, allowing it to create long chains, branching structures, and rings. This versatility makes it perfect for building the intricate molecules that life requires: proteins, nucleic acids, carbohydrates, and lipids. Carbon is also abundant in the universe, formed in the cores of stars and scattered by supernovae. Any life on Kepler 472e almost certainly uses carbon as well. But the specifics could vary enormously. Earth life uses a genetic system based on DNA and RNA, molecules that store and transmit hereditary information. The genetic code relies on 4 nucleotide bases, abbreviated A, T, G, and C for DNA, or A, U, G, and C for RNA. These bases pair in specific ways, A with T or U, G with C, creating the double helix structure that allows DNA to replicate. This system works brilliantly, but it's not the only possibility. Laboratory experiments have created alternative nucleic acids, called XNAs, that can store genetic information using different sugars and bases. Evolution on another world might have stumbled upon an entirely different information storage system. The proteins that do most of the work in Earth life are built from 20 standard amino acids. These amino acids link together in specific sequences to create proteins that catalyze chemical reactions, provide structure, transport molecules, and perform countless other functions. But amino acids come in hundreds of varieties beyond the 20 that Earth life uses. Perhaps life on Kepler 472e incorporates different amino acids, creating proteins with capabilities we've never seen. Perhaps it uses entirely different polymers, molecules that don't exist in Earth biology but serve similar functions. Now consider the energy source. Life needs energy to maintain itself, grow, and reproduce. On Earth, the ultimate energy source for most life is sunlight. Photosynthetic organisms, plants, algae, and certain bacteria capture light energy and use it to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars. These sugars then feed the rest of the ecosystem. But photosynthesis on Kepler 472e would face different constraints because the light itself is different. Red dwarf stars emit primarily in infrared and red wavelengths. Earth's photosynthesis is optimized for our sun's spectrum, which peaks in the visible range. Chlorophyll, the green pigment in plants, absorbs red and blue light but reflects green. On a world bathed in infrared and red light, photosynthetic organisms would need different pigments, molecules that absorb efficiently in those wavelengths. Some Earth bacteria already hint at possibilities. Purple sulfur bacteria use a pigment called bacteriochlorophyll that absorbs infrared light. These organisms thrive in environments where visible light doesn't penetrate, like the depths of stratified lakes. They represent an existence proof that photosynthesis can work with infrared radiation. Life on Kepler 472e might employ similar strategies, perhaps taken to extremes we haven't imagined. But there's a problem. Infrared photons carry less energy than visible or blue light photons. Energy equals frequency times Planck's constant. Lower frequency light, like infrared, delivers less energy per photon. This means infrared-based photosynthesis is less efficient. Organisms would need to capture more photons to achieve the same energy yield. This might favor organisms with large light-collecting surfaces or organisms that exist in layers, with deeper organisms utilizing the infrared that passes through the upper layers. Alternatively, life on Kepler 472e might not rely primarily on photosynthesis. Earth also supports chemosynthetic ecosystems, communities powered by chemical energy rather than light. Hydrothermal vent communities in the deep ocean thrive in complete darkness, sustained by bacteria that extract energy from hydrogen sulfide and other chemicals spewing from the vents. If Kepler 472e has active geology, hydrothermal systems on the ocean floor or volcanic vents on land could support similar chemosynthetic ecosystems. In fact, chemosynthesis might have been life's first energy strategy, even on Earth. The earliest organisms probably didn't photosynthesize. They likely extracted energy from chemical gradients in the environment, perhaps near hydrothermal systems where hot, mineral-rich water mixed with cold ocean water. Photosynthesis evolved later as an adaptation that allowed organisms to tap into the abundant energy streaming down from the sun. On Kepler 472e, the balance between photosynthetic and chemosynthetic life might be different, perhaps tilted more toward chemistry if the star's light is less accessible or less energetically favorable. Now let's think about scale. Would life on Kepler 472e be microscopic, like Earth's bacteria? Or could it develop into larger, more complex forms? On Earth, life remains single-celled for billions of years. Multicellular organisms only emerged around 1 billion years ago, and complex animals with specialized organs appeared much more recently, in the Cambrian explosion roughly 540 million years ago. What triggered the transition to complex multicellular life on Earth? Multiple factors probably contributed. Atmospheric oxygen reached levels that could support aerobic respiration, a much more efficient way to generate energy than anaerobic metabolism. This energy windfall allowed cells to grow larger and more complex. Environmental stresses like ice ages and fluctuating ocean chemistry might have driven evolutionary innovation. Predation created arms races, with organisms evolving defenses and counter-defenses that led to increasing complexity. If Kepler 472e has low oxygen levels, 1 to 3% compared to Earth's 21%, could complex multicellular life evolve there? Maybe. Some Earth animals can survive in low oxygen environments. Certain fish tolerate oxygen levels as low as 1%. Insects in the Paleozoic era grew to gigantic sizes when atmospheric oxygen reached 35%, and they were much smaller when oxygen was lower. Low oxygen doesn't prohibit complex life, but it constrains how large and metabolically active organisms can become. Alternatively, life there might have found different solutions. Perhaps organisms evolved more efficient oxygen delivery systems, superhemoglobin, that extracts every available oxygen molecule. Perhaps metabolic processes evolved that don't rely on oxygen at all, using different electron acceptors for respiration. Earth life occasionally does this. Some bacteria respire using sulfate, nitrate, or even metal ions instead of oxygen. It's less efficient, but it works. The stronger gravity on Kepler 472e, 1.83 times Earth's, would also influence organism design. Larger organisms face structural challenges in higher gravity. Bones and support structures need to be stronger. Hearts need to work harder to pump fluids against gravity. On Earth, the largest land animal ever, the sauropod dinosaurs, reached masses of 60 to 80 tons. On a world with nearly twice Earth's gravity, such massive land animals probably couldn't exist. Their legs would break under their own weight, or their hearts would fail trying to pump blood to their heads. But evolution is resourceful. Perhaps life on Kepler 472e favors lower-profile body plans, organisms that stay close to the ground, distributing weight more effectively. Perhaps intelligent life there, if it exists, evolved as squat, heavily muscled creatures rather than the upright, relatively slender form humans have. Or perhaps complex life never left the oceans, where buoyancy counteracts gravity, allowing larger sizes without the structural penalties of life on land. Let's imagine a plausible ecosystem. The oceans teem with microscopic photosynthetic organisms, the equivalent of Earth's phytoplankton. They're deep red or black, absorbing every scrap of infrared and visible light. They produce oxygen as a byproduct of photosynthesis, but not as much as Earth's plants because the infrared light they use is less energetic. The oxygen levels rise slowly over billions of years until the atmosphere contains a few percent. This is enough to support aerobic metabolism, but not enough for high-energy lifestyles. These photosynthesizers are grazed upon by larger single-celled organisms, protist-like creatures that engulf their prey. Multicellular organisms evolved, some filtering the water for phytoplankton, others hunting the grazers. In the deep ocean where no light penetrates, chemosynthetic communities cluster around hydrothermal vents, powered by the planet's internal heat. These deep ecosystems are independent of the surface, thriving in eternal darkness. On land, if substantial landmasses exist, life faces different challenges. The red light creates landscapes that look alien to human eyes. Photosynthetic organisms, plants or plant-like creatures, carpet the land in shades of dark red, purple, or black. They're low-growing, hugging the surface both to maximize light capture in the dimmer conditions and to cope with the stronger gravity. Perhaps they form dense mats or crust-like growths rather than standing upright like Earth's trees. These primary producers support herbivores, creatures that graze on the photosynthetic mats. They're built low and strong with multiple legs distributing their weight. Their metabolisms run slower than Earth animals in comparable niches because the lower oxygen levels limit aerobic respiration. They move deliberately, conserving energy. Predators stalk them, equally constrained by oxygen and gravity, relying on ambush tactics rather than long chases. The discovery of life on another world, even microbial life, even tentative evidence of microbial life, would fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the universe. For thousands of years, we've asked one of the most profound questions imaginable. Are we alone? Every civilization that has looked up at the stars has wondered whether other minds look back. Now, standing at the threshold of potentially answering that question, we need to consider what the answer really means. Let's start with the statistics. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, contains somewhere between 100 billion and 400 billion stars. Recent exoplanet surveys suggest that virtually every star has at least one planet. Many have multiple planets. A significant fraction of those planets, perhaps 20 to 50%, orbit within their star's habitable zone. Do the mathematics, and you get billions of potentially habitable worlds in our galaxy alone. The observable universe contains an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. Each galaxy has billions or trillions of stars. Each star likely has planets. The numbers become so large they lose meaning. We're talking about planets numbering in the billions of trillions, more worlds than grains of sand on all of Earth's beaches. Among all those worlds, how many might harbor life? Before we had evidence either way, this question was pure speculation. The Drake equation, formulated in 1961 by astronomer Frank Drake, attempted to estimate the number of detectable civilizations in our galaxy by multiplying together various factors: the rate of star formation, the fraction with planets, the number of habitable planets per system, the fraction where life actually emerges, the fraction where life becomes intelligent, the fraction that develops detectable technology, and how long such civilizations last. Plug in different values, and you get wildly different results, from we're alone in the galaxy to there should be millions of civilizations. The problem was that most of those factors were complete unknowns. We didn't know how common planets were. We didn't know how many would be habitable. And we had absolutely no idea how likely life was to emerge on a habitable planet. That last factor, the probability of abiogenesis, life arising from non-life, was pure guesswork. Maybe it's incredibly common, happening whenever conditions are right. Maybe it's incredibly rare, a 1 in a billion fluke that happened on Earth and nowhere else. If life exists on Kepler 472e, we gain our second data point. We go from one known example of life to two. That might not sound like much, but it's infinitely more than one in a statistical sense. Two independent origins of life suggest that life is not a fluke. If life arose independently on two worlds in our tiny corner of the galaxy, both orbiting ordinary stars, both within 150 light-years of each other, then life is probably common. The galaxy is probably teeming with it. Consider the implications. If life arises readily wherever conditions are suitable, then the billions of potentially habitable worlds in the Milky Way are probably, at least in some significant fraction, actually inhabited. Microbes on countless worlds. Oceans filled with strange chemistries, atmospheres altered by biological processes, an entire galaxy alive in ways we're only beginning to detect. But here's a crucial distinction. Microbial life and complex life are very different things. On Earth, life remained single-celled for roughly 3 billion years. Multicellular organisms only emerged in the last billion years. Complex animals with brains and behavior appeared only in the last few 100 million years. Intelligent, technological species, as far as we know, emerged exactly once, with humans, and very recently, within the last few 100,000 years. This timeline suggests that while the origin of life might be relatively easy, the transition to complexity is much harder. Perhaps the galaxy has millions or billions of worlds with bacterial life, but only a handful with anything more advanced. Perhaps Earth's progression from microbes to humans was unlikely, requiring specific environmental triggers, evolutionary accidents, or lucky breaks that most biospheres never experience. Or perhaps we're wrong about the timeline. Perhaps complexity evolves faster under different conditions. Kepler 472e orbits a stable red dwarf that could shine for trillions of years. If that system is older than ours, life there has had more time to evolve. Maybe complexity emerges given enough time, and we're relatively young on the cosmic timescale. Maybe older biospheres routinely develop complex ecosystems, intelligence, even civilizations. This brings us to the Fermi paradox. If the galaxy is ancient, if life is common, if some fraction of life becomes intelligent and develops technology, then where is everybody? Why haven't we detected alien radio signals? Why haven't we been visited by interstellar probes? Why does the galaxy seem so quiet? Many proposed solutions exist. Perhaps intelligent life is common, but technological civilizations are short-lived, destroying themselves through warfare, environmental collapse, or other catastrophes before they can spread beyond their home worlds. Perhaps intelligence is rare, requiring specific evolutionary pressures that most planets don't provide. Perhaps interstellar travel is prohibitively difficult, trapping civilizations on their home worlds no matter how advanced they become. Perhaps advanced civilizations deliberately stay hidden, avoiding contact with younger species like us. Or perhaps we're simply looking in the wrong ways. We're searching for radio signals, But maybe advanced civilizations use communication methods we can't detect or don't recognize. We're looking for megastructures and industrial signatures, but maybe mature civilizations build small, efficient technologies that don't leave obvious traces. We're listening on timescales of decades, but galactic civilizations might operate on timescales of millions of years. Finding life on Kepler 472e wouldn't immediately solve the Fermi paradox, but it would constrain the possibilities. If life is common, then the great filter, whatever mechanism prevents the universe from being obviously full of intelligence, must operate at a later stage. Either intelligence rarely evolves from simple life, or intelligent species rarely develop technology, or technological civilizations rarely last long, or they rarely expand beyond their home systems. Each possibility has profound implications for humanity's future. If the filter is behind us, if the hard step was the origin of life or the evolution of complexity, and we've already passed it, then our future might be bright. We might be among the few species that made it this far, with a clear path ahead to become a spacefaring civilization. But if the filter is ahead of us, if something tends to destroy civilizations at our current level, or shortly beyond it, then we're approaching danger. The very technologies we're developing, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, genetic engineering, might contain the seeds of our destruction. There's another philosophical dimension to consider. The discovery of alien life, even microbial life, challenges our anthropocentric worldview. For most of human history, we believed Earth was the center of the universe. Then Copernicus showed we orbit the Sun. Then we learned the Sun is one ordinary star among billions. Then we discovered those stars have planets. Now we're discovering that life might be a common feature of planets in the right conditions. At each step, we're displaced from the center, made less special, less unique. This cosmic humbling is sometimes called the Copernican principle, or the principle of mediocrity. We're not special. We're not the purpose of the universe. We're one outcome among countless others, products of natural processes that operate everywhere the conditions allow. Some people find this depressing, a diminishment of human significance. Others find it liberating, a connection to something larger than ourselves. Consider how different cultures and belief systems might respond to confirmed extraterrestrial life. Some religious traditions would find it challenging, especially those that place humanity at the center of creation or salvation. If God created life on other worlds, does that life have a relationship with the divine? Do they have their own prophets, their own revelations, their own paths to salvation? Other religious traditions might embrace the discovery more easily, seeing it as confirmation of the universe's abundance and creativity. Science fiction has prepared us for this moment in some ways, but perhaps not in the ways that matter. Popular culture tends to imagine alien contact as a dramatic event. Flying saucers landing on the White House lawn, radio messages containing mathematical proofs, ancient artifacts discovered on Mars. The reality of finding microbial biosignatures in exoplanet atmospheres is less cinematic, but no less profound. This is first contact through spectroscopy, meeting alien life by analyzing the light that filtered through their air billions of miles away. And yet, this method of discovery comes with unique frustrations. We might never visit Kepler 472e. At 124 light-years away, even traveling at 10% the speed of light, a speed we can't remotely achieve with current technology, the journey would take 1,240 years. We would be studying this life forever from a distance, analyzing atmospheric chemistry, perhaps eventually detecting surface features with next-generation telescopes, but never touching, never sampling, never seeing it directly. This distance creates a strange relationship with discovery. We're detecting the effect of life, the gases it produces, the way it alters its environment, but not life itself. We're seeing the shadow, not the substance. It's like being an archaeologist studying an ancient civilization entirely through chemical analysis of their garbage. You can learn what they ate, what materials they used, perhaps something about their population and technology, but you'll never meet them, never hear their voices, never understand their thoughts and dreams. Perhaps this is the nature of cosmic discovery in a universe where distances are measured in light years. We find evidence, we infer existence, we build models and test hypotheses, but we rarely, if ever, get direct confirmation. The universe is vast, and we are small. Our telescopes can reach farther than we can travel. Our minds can imagine worlds we'll never touch, yet there's beauty in this limitation. Every photon that reaches us from Kepler 472e carries information. Light that left that world during the 19th century, traveling through the vacuum of space for more than a century, arrives at our telescopes and tells us stories. Stories about molecules and atmospheres, about chemistry and possibly biology, about a world we've never seen but can begin to understand. The tentative findings from Kepler 472e represent just the beginning of what will likely be decades of investigation. Science doesn't move in dramatic leaps from hypothesis to confirmation. It moves through painstaking accumulation of evidence, through repeated observations, through peer review and replication, through the gradual building of consensus, or the rejection of ideas that don't hold up to scrutiny. So what happens next? How do we move from intriguing hints to definitive answers? The immediate next step is more observations with James Webb. The initial detections came from a limited number of transits, perhaps 4 to 6 observations spread over several months. Each transit provides a snapshot of the planet's atmosphere, but atmospheres can change. Weather patterns shift. Seasonal variations occur if the planet has seasons. Volcanic eruptions might temporarily alter atmospheric composition. To build confidence in the detections, scientists need to observe many more transits, creating a statistical baseline that separates real signals from noise. Webb's observation schedule is planned years in advance. Every proposal for telescope time goes through rigorous review, competing with hundreds of other worthy projects. The team studying Kepler 472e has submitted proposals for additional observations, arguing that the potential implications justify the investment of precious telescope time. These proposals are currently under review, evaluated by committees of scientists who must weigh the importance of this target against all the other fascinating questions Webb could address. If approved, the follow-up observations would focus on several goals. First, confirming the methane detection with higher precision. Methane has multiple absorption features at different wavelengths. Detecting it consistently across multiple features and multiple transits would strengthen confidence that it's really there and not an artifact or misidentification. Second, pinning down the oxygen signal. Is it real? What are the exact concentrations? How does it vary with altitude in the atmosphere? Third, and most critically, resolving the dimethyl sulfide question. This requires observations with specific instrument settings optimized for the wavelengths where dimethyl sulfide absorbs most strongly. But James Webb alone won't provide all the answers. Other telescopes will play crucial roles. The Hubble Space Telescope, despite being older and less powerful than Webb, still operates and can observe in wavelengths that complement Webb's infrared focus. Hubble's ultraviolet and visible light capabilities allow it to study different aspects of the planet's atmosphere and stars' activity. Joint observations from both telescopes provide a more complete picture. Ground-based telescopes are also essential. The largest ground-based observatories, like the Very Large Telescope in Chile or the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, can study the stars' variability, searching for flares or other activity that might affect the planet. They can also perform their own transmission spectroscopy, cross-checking Webb's findings with independent measurements. This redundancy is crucial in science. Multiple instruments observing the same phenomenon and reaching the same conclusions provide much stronger evidence than a single instrument alone. Then there are the next-generation telescopes currently under construction. The extremely large telescope, being built in Chile, will have a mirror 39 meters across, dwarfing even Webb's impressive aperture. It's scheduled to begin operations in the late 2020s. The Giant Magellan Telescope and the 30-meter telescope are also under construction, promising unprecedented light-gathering power and resolution. These instruments will be able to study exoplanet atmospheres in far greater detail than currently possible. Perhaps most exciting is the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, set to launch in the late 2020s. Roman is optimized for wide-field surveys, allowing it to study many exoplanets relatively quickly. It won't provide the same depth of detail as Webb for individual targets, but it will give us statistical context. How common are planets like Kepler 472e? How many show similar atmospheric signatures? Are we looking at something unique, or a representative example of a common planet type? Further in the future, concepts exist for even more ambitious missions. The Habitable Exoplanet Observatory, sometimes called HABEX, would be a space telescope specifically designed to directly image Earth-like exoplanets. Instead of observing transits, it would actually photograph the planet, separating its faint light from the overwhelming glare of its star using a device called a starshade. Direct imaging would allow scientists to study reflected light from the planet's surface and clouds, potentially detecting seasonal changes, weather patterns, even the spectral signature of vegetation if it exists. Another proposed mission, the Large Ultraviolet Optical Infrared Surveyor, or LUVOIR, would be an enormous space telescope, possibly 8 to 16 meters in diameter, capable of directly imaging and characterizing dozens of nearby Earth-like planets. These missions remain concepts, requiring technological development and funding that haven't yet materialized, but they represent the trajectory of exoplanet science, moving from detection to characterization to detailed study to eventually, perhaps, direct observation. While we wait for future telescopes, theoretical work continues. Scientists are building increasingly sophisticated atmospheric models, simulating what different types of planets should look like under various conditions. If Kepler 472e has a global ocean, how would that affect its spectrum? If it has continents, how would exposed rock alter the observations? If clouds cover 80% of the surface, what would that do to the thermal emission? These models generate predictions that can be tested against observations, helping to narrow down the planet's actual conditions. Astrobiologists are also exploring the question of what biosignatures might look like on planets very different from Earth. Dimethyl sulfide is a biosignature on Earth, but is it universal? Would life on other worlds produce the same molecules? Or might alien biochemistry generate entirely different compounds? Some researchers are cataloging every molecule produced by Earth life, creating databases of potential biosignatures. Others are imagining alternative biochemistries, life based on different solvents than water, or using different metabolic pathways, and predicting what gases those alternatives might produce. This work is crucial because we need to avoid two opposite errors. We don't want to mistake non-biological processes for life, seeing biosignatures where none exist, but we also don't want to miss life because it doesn't look like what we expected. If life on Kepler 472e uses a completely different biochemistry than Earth life, it might not produce any of the gases we think of as biosignatures. It might alter its environment in ways we haven't imagined. We need to be open-minded enough to recognize the unexpected while remaining rigorous enough to avoid false positives. There's also the question of how to communicate these findings to the public. The scientific process is cautious, incremental, filled with caveats and uncertainties. Scientists talk about confidence levels, statistical significance, alternative hypotheses. But the public often wants definitive answers. Is there life on this planet or not? The honest answer right now is we don't know, but we have intriguing hints that warrant further investigation. That's not as satisfying as yes or no, but it's the truth. This communication challenge becomes even more acute if evidence continues to accumulate. At what point do scientists feel confident enough to make a strong claim? Finding one potential biosignature like methane isn't enough. Finding two, methane and oxygen together, is more interesting but still not definitive. Finding three, adding dimethyl sulfide, starts to look compelling. Finding 4 or 5, detecting seasonal variations, observing correlations between different molecules that make sense biologically but not geologically, that's when the case becomes very strong. but even then, absolute proof might remain elusive. We're not going to land a rover on Kepler 472e and examine microbes under a microscope. We're not going to bring back samples for laboratory analysis. We're making inferences based on light, and inferences always carry uncertainty. The standard of proof in astrobiology might ultimately be not absolute certainty, but rather that the biological explanation is far more plausible than any non-biological alternative. This is actually how science often works in fields where direct experimentation is impossible. We can't rerun the evolution of life on Earth to see if we get the same result. We can't travel back in time to observe the formation of the solar system. We can't watch a star collapse into a black hole from close range. Instead, we gather evidence, we build models, we test predictions, and we develop theories that best explain all the available data. If the theory of biological activity on Kepler 472e better explains the atmospheric observations than any geological or chemical theory, and if that explanation makes testable predictions that are confirmed by further observations, then we might reasonably conclude that life is the most likely explanation. Meanwhile, the search continues on other fronts. Kepler 472e is just one planet among thousands of known exoplanets. James Webb is studying dozens of others, each with its own unique characteristics. Some are hot Jupiters with atmospheres of vaporized metals. Some are mini Neptunes with thick hydrogen envelopes. Some are rocky worlds, closer or farther from their stars than the habitable zone, teaching us about planetary formation and evolution. Each discovery adds to our understanding of how planets work and what conditions might support life. And beyond the exoplanets, we're also searching for life closer to home. Mars rovers are exploring ancient lake beds, drilling into rocks, searching for preserved organic molecules that might indicate past life. Missions are planned to Jupiter's moon, Europa, and Saturn's moon, Enceladus, both of which have subsurface oceans that might harbor microbial life. These ocean worlds offer different environments than terrestrial planets, places where life could exist not on a surface, but in the darkness beneath kilometers of ice, sustained by chemical energy from the ocean floor. If we find life on Mars, or Europa, or Enceladus, and if we also confirm life on Kepler 472e, we would have multiple independent examples, possibly 4 or more origins of life in one galaxy. At that point, the conclusion becomes inescapable. Life is not rare. Life is a natural consequence of chemistry and physics arising wherever conditions allow. The universe is not a sterile void with life as an improbable accident on one insignificant planet. The universe is fertile, pregnant with possibility, full of worlds where chemistry becomes biology and matter becomes alive. Stand outside on a clear night and look up. The stars you see are neighbors, relatively speaking, within a few thousand light years. Among those points of light, how many shine on living worlds? Before the discoveries of the past few decades, we could only guess. Now we're beginning to understand that planets are everywhere, and if life exists on Kepler 472e, we're learning that biology might be everywhere too. This knowledge, even tentative knowledge, changes everything about how we think about our place in the cosmos and our future as a species. Let's start with the practical implications. If life is common, then the search for biosignatures becomes one of humanity's most important scientific endeavors. We're not searching for a needle in a haystack, hoping to get lucky. We're cataloging a phenomenon that occurs throughout the galaxy, studying its variations, understanding its principles. This shifts the entire paradigm of astrobiology from maybe we'll find something someday to systematic exploration of a widespread natural phenomenon. Future space missions will be designed with this understanding in mind. Instead of treating biosignature detection as a speculative goal, mission planners will prioritize it as a primary objective. Telescopes will be optimized for atmospheric spectroscopy. Instruments will target specific molecules known to be biosignatures. Observation strategies will focus on planets most likely to harbor life, red-dwarf habitable zones, ocean worlds, planets with long-term climate stability. This focused approach accelerates discovery. The first confirmed detection is the hardest because you're establishing the methods and proving the concept. The second is easier. The 10th is routine. Within a few decades, we might have catalogs of living worlds, databases showing which planets have methane, which have oxygen, which show evidence of complex organic chemistry. We might classify biospheres the way we currently classify stars, creating taxonomies based on atmospheric composition, metabolic strategies, and evolutionary stage. This knowledge would also guide the search for intelligent life. If simple life is common, but we still don't detect any technological civilizations, that tells us something profound about the trajectory from microbes to intelligence. It suggests that the hard step is not the origin of life, but the evolution of complexity and cognition. It means most biospheres never develop intelligence, remaining microbial indefinitely, or perhaps developing complex ecosystems, but never crossing the threshold to tool use, language, and technology. Understanding this would help us appreciate how unlikely our own existence might be. Humans evolved from a lineage that survived multiple mass extinctions, climate upheavals, and evolutionary dead ends. Intelligence required not just the right environmental conditions but a specific sequence of events: primates evolving hands capable of manipulation, social structures that favored cooperation and communication, challenges that rewarded problem-solving and innovation. Maybe that sequence is rare. Maybe most planets with life never produce anything that asks questions or builds telescopes. Or maybe we're simply too early. The universe is 13.8 billion years old, but most red dwarf stars will shine for trillions of years. If complex life requires billions of years to evolve, and intelligence requires billions more, then maybe we're among the first civilizations to emerge. Maybe the galaxy will be full of intelligence eventually, but right now, in the early 21st century, we're pioneers, among the first minds to wake up and look outward. This possibility carries both opportunity and responsibility. If we're early, if there are few or no other technological civilizations yet, then the future of intelligence in the galaxy might depend on us. Whether life spreads beyond Earth, whether consciousness explores the cosmos, whether the universe comes to know itself, all of this might hinge on choices humanity makes in the coming centuries. Do we destroy ourselves? Or do we survive our technological adolescence and mature into a spacefaring civilization? The discovery of life on other worlds, even microbial life, provides perspective on this question. It shows us that we're not alone, that life is resilient and creative, that the universe generates complexity and beauty. But it also shows us that life is precious, that planets capable of supporting it are special, that the biosphere we've inherited on Earth took billions of years to develop and can be damaged or destroyed in mere decades. Earth is currently experiencing its 6th mass extinction, driven by human activity. Species are disappearing at rates hundreds or thousands of times higher than the background extinction rate. Ecosystems are collapsing under the pressure of climate change, habitat destruction, pollution, and overexploitation. We're conducting a vast, uncontrolled experiment on the only confirmed living world in the universe, our home planet, and the results are not encouraging. Finding life on Kepler 472e won't solve these problems, but it might change how we think about them. When Earth is the only known living world, it's easy to take it for granted, to assume that life is durable and will bounce back from whatever we do to it. But when we understand that habitable planets are special, that they require specific conditions and billions of years of development, that the biosphere is a complex, fragile system that can be irreparably damaged, then perhaps we treat our own planet with more respect. There's also an ethical dimension. If life exists on other worlds, do we have obligations toward it? Most people would agree that we shouldn't deliberately destroy alien life, but what about more subtle questions? If we develop the capability to travel to other star systems, should we visit planets with native biospheres? Should we study them from a distance, or is close-up investigation acceptable? If we find a lifeless but habitable planet, do we have the right to terraform it and introduce Earth life? Or should we leave it pristine? These questions might seem premature. Interstellar travel remains firmly in the realm of science fiction with our current technology. But technology advances. What's impossible today might be routine in a few centuries, and the ethical frameworks we develop now will guide future decisions. Science fiction has explored these themes for decades, creating stories about first contact, planetary protection, and the rights of alien life. Now those stories might become policy discussions. Consider the concept of planetary protection, currently applied to solar system exploration. When we send spacecraft to Mars or Europa, we sterilize them carefully to avoid contaminating those worlds with Earth microbes. The goal is to preserve any native life that might exist and to ensure that when we search for life, we're finding indigenous organisms, not hitchhikers from Earth. If we confirm that Kepler 472e has life, suddenly planetary protection becomes relevant to exoplanet exploration too. But there's an irony here. We're detecting life on Kepler 472e if the biosignatures are confirmed by observing it from 124 light-years away. We're not contaminating it. We're not disturbing it. We're simply watching, learning, understanding. This is perhaps the most ethical form of exobiology imaginable, studying life without interfering, appreciating its existence without altering it. Distance becomes a protective barrier, ensuring that first contact, if it can be called that, is purely observational. Yet this distance also creates frustration. Human curiosity is boundless. We want to know more. What does life on Kepler 472e actually look like? How does its biochemistry work? Did it evolve from a single origin, or did life start multiple times on that world? Has it remained microbial, or has complexity emerged? Are there ecosystems, food webs, predator-prey relationships? Do any organisms have nervous systems, behavior, perhaps even rudimentary cognition? We might never know the answers to these questions. Telescopes, no matter how powerful, have limits. We can detect atmospheric molecules. We might eventually map surface features, distinguishing oceans from continents, detecting seasonal changes in vegetation if it exists. But we can't see individual organisms. We can't study their cellular structure. We can't sequence their genes or watch their behavior or understand their ecology in detail. This limitation might persist for centuries or even millennia. Unless we develop technology that allows practical interstellar travel, an enormous challenge given the vast distances involved, or unless we build space-based observatories so large and sophisticated they can directly image exoplanet surfaces at high resolution, we're confined to remote sensing. We're cosmic naturalists, observing alien worlds through telescopes, the way 18th-century naturalists observed distant lands through spyglasses. But perhaps there's wisdom in this constraint. It forces us to appreciate life for what it is, not for how we can exploit it. We're learning that the universe is more than resources to be extracted and territory to be claimed. It's a tapestry of worlds, each with its own history, its own character, its own intrinsic value. Life on Kepler 472e doesn't exist for our benefit. It's not there to be studied or utilized or contacted. It simply exists, doing what life does, transforming energy and matter into complexity and pattern. Understanding this might help us develop a more mature cosmic perspective. We're not the center of the universe. We're not its purpose or its pinnacle. We're one outcome among many, one instance of matter organizing itself into self-replicating, evolving systems that eventually become capable of contemplating their own existence. That's extraordinary, but it's not unique. If life exists on Kepler 472e, if it exists on countless other worlds, then the universe is full of such outcomes, variations on the theme of biology playing out across billions of light-years. This realization could either diminish us or elevate us. Diminish us because we're not special, just one more planet with life in a galaxy full of them. Elevate us because we're part of something larger, a cosmic process of increasing complexity and self-awareness. Life isn't an aberration or an accident. It's what the universe does when conditions allow. And we, as conscious beings capable of understanding this, are the universe's way of knowing itself. We began this journey with a number, Kepler 472e, a catalog designation for a world discovered by a telescope that no longer functions, orbiting a star so faint you couldn't see it with your naked eye even if you knew exactly where to look. But numbers and catalogs don't capture what this world really represents. It's a mirror held up to Earth, reflecting back questions about origins, existence, and meaning that humanity has asked since we first looked up at the night sky. The story of Kepler 472e is really the story of human curiosity. We built instruments to extend our senses across impossible distances. We developed mathematical frameworks to interpret patterns in starlight. We learned to read atmospheres we can never visit, to detect molecules in air we'll never breathe, to find evidence of processes happening on worlds we'll never touch. This is science at its most ambitious, reaching across the cosmic void to understand realities fundamentally separate from our own. But it's also a story about uncertainty and the courage to accept it. We don't know definitively whether life exists on this planet. We have intriguing hints, tantalizing possibilities, data that suggests but doesn't prove. The scientists studying this world are careful with their words, hedging their conclusions with caveats, acknowledging alternative explanations. This caution isn't weakness, it's integrity. It's the recognition that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we're still gathering that evidence. Living with uncertainty is uncomfortable. We want answers. We want to know if we're alone or if life is common, if intelligence is rare or abundant, if the universe is mostly dead rock or teeming with biology. These questions touch something deep in human psychology, our need to understand our place in the grand scheme of things. But the universe doesn't owe us easy answers. Sometimes the honest response to the biggest questions is, we don't know yet, but we're working on it. What we do know is remarkable enough. We know that planets outnumber stars. We know that many of those planets orbit in habitable zones where liquid water can exist. We know that the building blocks of life, organic molecules, are common throughout the universe. We know that life emerged on Earth relatively quickly after the planet cooled enough to support it, suggesting that the transition from chemistry to biology isn't impossibly unlikely. We know that life, once established, proved remarkably resilient, surviving multiple mass extinctions and adapting to environments ranging from boiling hot springs to Antarctic ice. All this knowledge points toward a conclusion that would have seemed like fantasy just a generation ago. The universe is probably full of life, not little green aliens visiting Earth in flying saucers, not ancient civilizations beaming messages across the galaxy, but life in its most fundamental sense, self-replicating chemical systems that extract energy from their environment, evolve, and increase in complexity. Microbes in subsurface oceans, bacterial mats on rocky shores, perhaps photosynthetic organisms carpeting land and sea, possibly even, on some worlds, complex ecosystems with multicellular organisms interacting in intricate webs of predation and cooperation. If this conclusion is correct, then Kepler 472e is not an anomaly. It's an example, one living world among countless others, each shaped by its particular history and conditions, each expressing the universal principles of biology in its own unique way. The methane in its atmosphere, if confirmed, is the same methane that Earth bacteria produce, but made by organisms that evolved independently, that have different biochemistry, that live in different ecosystems under a different sun. Same molecule, different story. This diversity is what makes astrobiology so fascinating. We're not looking for copies of Earth. We're discovering how many different ways planets can be habitable and how many different forms life can take. Earth is our template, the only example we had until now, but it's not a blueprint. Life elsewhere will be shaped by different chemistry, different energy sources, different evolutionary pressures. It will surprise us, challenge our assumptions, expand our understanding of what's possible. And what about intelligence? If simple life is common, as Kepler 472e suggests, then what about minds? What about consciousness, language, technology, civilization? We still don't know. The galaxy appears quiet. We haven't detected artificial radio signals or evidence of megastructures or any obvious signs of technological civilizations. This silence is puzzling if intelligent life is common, but it makes sense if intelligence is rare. Perhaps the evolution of complex cognition requires not just billions of years, but also specific environmental circumstances that most planets never experience. Perhaps intelligence evolves occasionally, but technological civilization almost never does, because tool use requires the right body plan. Social structures favor certain cognitive abilities, and numerous other factors must align. Perhaps civilizations typically don't last long, either destroying themselves or reaching a technological plateau where they don't produce detectable signals. Or perhaps intelligence is out there, but we're too young and too primitive to recognize it. Maybe advanced civilizations communicate in ways we haven't imagined. Maybe they've learned to avoid creating obvious technosignatures. Maybe they're deliberately quiet, waiting to see if younger species like us survive our own technological adolescence before making contact. Maybe the galaxy operates under protocols of non-interference, with mature civilizations observing newcomers but not revealing themselves until certain developmental thresholds are met. These are all speculations, thought experiments without data to support or refute them, but they represent the next frontier. If we confirm life on Kepler 472e, the question shifts from "is there life out there" to "how common is intelligence?" And that question might take centuries or millennia to answer as we develop better instruments, study more planets, and perhaps eventually explore nearby star systems directly. In the meantime, we have the profound privilege of living during the transition from wondering to knowing. For thousands of years, humans looked at the stars and asked if we're alone. For most of that time, the question was unanswerable, a matter of philosophy and speculation. Now, within the span of a single human lifetime, we've gone from not knowing whether any planets exist beyond our solar system to studying the atmospheres of thousands of exoplanets and potentially detecting biosignatures. This is an extraordinary moment in human history. Whatever your age, wherever you live, you're experiencing something unprecedented. You're alive during the era when humanity first learns whether life exists elsewhere. You're witnessing the scientific process unfolding in real time as researchers gather data, debate interpretations, and slowly build understanding. You have access to knowledge that previous generations could barely imagine, but with this knowledge comes responsibility. If life is common, if planets like Kepler 472e exist throughout the galaxy, then Earth is not unique in being habitable, but it is unique in being our home. We evolved here. Our bodies are adapted to its gravity, its atmosphere, its ecosystems. Our civilizations are built on its resources. Our survival depends on maintaining the systems that make this planet livable. Finding other living worlds doesn't give us permission to destroy our own. If anything, it should make us appreciate what we have. Earth is the only planet we can currently reach, the only world whose ecosystems we can directly study, the only biosphere we can protect, or, through negligence or malice, damage beyond repair. The discovery of life elsewhere doesn't change this fundamental reality. It contextualizes it, showing us that habitable planets are precious not because they're impossibly rare, but because they're complex, fragile systems that took billions of years to develop and can be altered in mere decades. So what does Kepler 472e mean, ultimately? It means we're not alone in the universe, or at least we probably aren't. It means life is a natural phenomenon, not a miracle unique to Earth. It means the cosmos is richer, stranger, more alive than we once thought. It means the questions we ask are shifting from "does life exist?" to "how does life work?" and "what forms can it take?" And are there minds out there wondering the same things we wonder? It means we're part of something larger than ourselves, larger than our species, larger than our planet. We're participants in a cosmic story of matter organizing itself into ever-increasing complexity. of chemistry becoming biology, of molecules becoming microbes, becoming ecosystems, becoming perhaps eventually intelligence capable of understanding its own origins and place in the universe. That story is still being written. The observations of Kepler 472e are preliminary. The biosignatures are tentative. Confirmation might come next year, or might take decades. Other planets might yield clearer evidence sooner. Or the signals might turn out to be false positives, geological phenomena mimicking biological ones, teaching us to be more careful in our interpretations. But whatever happens with this particular world, the search continues. Every new exoplanet discovered, every atmospheric spectrum analyzed, every model refined and tested brings us closer to understanding our place in the cosmos. We're explorers standing on the shore of an infinite ocean, having just learned to build boats. The journey ahead is longer than we can imagine, full of discoveries we can't predict, leading to destinations we can barely conceive. Kepler 472e, Earth 3.0, is one island in that ocean, perhaps inhabited, perhaps not. Perhaps teeming with life in forms alien to us, perhaps sterile rock and water. But definitely real, definitely out there, definitely waiting for us to understand it better. And in studying it, in reaching across 124 light-years to analyze the composition of its air, we're doing something profoundly human. We're satisfying curiosity. We're seeking truth. We're asking questions whose answers might not benefit us materially, but enrich us spiritually. This is what separates us from simple chemistry. Molecules don't wonder. They react according to physical laws, forming and breaking bonds, releasing and absorbing energy, but never asking why. Life, even simple life, is different. It persists, it adapts, it evolves. And eventually, on at least one world, and possibly many, life becomes conscious. It becomes aware of itself and its surroundings. It looks outward and asks questions. Are we alone? What is life? Where did we come from? Where are we going? What does it all mean? These are the questions that make us human. And the search for life on worlds like Kepler 472e is our latest attempt to answer them. Whatever we discover, whether this particular planet harbors life or not, the search itself is meaningful. It connects us to our ancestors who wondered about the stars, and to our descendants who might one day walk on alien shores. It represents the best of what our species can be: curious, rational, ambitious, humble enough to accept we don't know everything, but bold enough to try finding out. The universe is vast, and we are small. But we're not insignificant. We're the part of the universe that wakes up, looks around, and tries to understand. We're atoms arranged in patterns complex enough to contemplate their own existence. We're stardust that became conscious and turned telescopes on the stars from which we came. And now, perhaps, we're discovering that we're not the only stardust to achieve consciousness. Somewhere out there, 124 light-years away, orbiting a dim red star in the constellation Lyra, there might be another world where chemistry became biology and life found a way. That world won't be Earth. It will be strange, alien, shaped by different forces than those that shaped our home. But it will be alive, and that changes everything. If you're hungry for more mind-bending astronomical discoveries, then you need to watch my previous video about the largest star ever discovered in the universe. While we've explored the smallest habitable worlds where life might exist, that video takes you to the opposite extreme. Stellar giants so massive they challenge our understanding of physics itself. Stars so enormous that if you placed one at the center of our solar system, it would engulf everything out past Saturn's orbit.